What if I told you that the most effective Crusader king never fought a battle to reclaim Jerusalem, that a sickly orphan boy would grow to become the most powerful, educated, and controversial ruler of medieval Europe? This is the extraordinary story of Frederick II, the wonder of the world, a man so ahead of his time that his contemporaries called him either the Antichrist or the Messiah. Today we're exploring how a vulnerable child became the most fascinating emperor in European history.
Welcome to the Saving History podcast, the sanctuary for castle devotees and medieval history enthusiasts. Prepare to embark on a thrilling voyage through time as we unveil enthralling history and legend. From ancient folklore to cutting-edge restoration, we've got it all covered. So grab your headphones and let's dive right in.
In the shadows of crumbling castles and soaring cathedrals, one figure stands above all others in medieval history, a ruler so extraordinary that those who witnessed his achievements could scarcely believe he was human. They called him Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world, and for good reason. Imagine a medieval king who spoke 6 languages fluently when most couldn't read a single one. Picture a ruler who conducted scientific experiments while others consulted astrologers. Envision an emperor who reclaimed Jerusalem without spilling a drop of blood when countless crusaders had failed with their swords. This was Frederick II, a man who seemed to belong more to the Renaissance than to the Middle Ages. The story that unfolds before us is almost too remarkable to be true. A sickly orphan, abandoned to wander the streets of Sicily, rises to command the mightiest empire in Europe, a ruler excommunicated by the Pope, who then crowns himself King of Jerusalem inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. A Christian emperor who spoke Arabic, employed Muslim scholars, and negotiated with sultans as equals. Frederick's court in Palermo became a dazzling center of learning where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars worked side by side, while elsewhere in Europe, religious persecution raged. His scientific writings were so advanced they remained relevant for centuries. His legal code introduced concepts so forward-thinking that they wouldn't become commonplace until hundreds of years after his death. Even Frederick's enemies couldn't help but acknowledge his genius. Pope Gregory IX, who excommunicated him 4 times, called him the beast of the apocalypse, yet couldn't deny the emperor's extraordinary intellect. The Muslim world, typically hostile to Crusader kings, respected Frederick as a wise and tolerant ruler, unlike any European they had encountered before. How did a vulnerable boy, orphaned at 4 years old, transform himself into Europe's greatest ruler? What inner strength allowed him to survive when all expected him to perish? What vision drove him to create a multicultural court centuries before such ideas would be embraced? To understand this extraordinary man, we must journey back to his unlikely beginnings to a public square in Italy, where a controversial birth would launch one of history's most remarkable lives. The winter air hung cold over the Italian town of Jesi on the day after Christmas 1194. In the town square, something unprecedented was happening. A heavily pregnant empress, 40 years old, ancient by medieval standards, had ordered a pavilion erected in the public square. Noble ladies of the town were invited to witness what would happen next: the birth of an imperial heir. This extraordinary public spectacle was no royal whim. Empress Constance of Sicily had a desperate purpose. Rumours had circulated for months that a woman of her advanced age couldn't possibly be with child. Some whispered she planned to present someone else's baby as her own. So she made the unthinkable choice to give birth before witnesses, ensuring no one could question her son's legitimacy. Into this suspicious, politically charged atmosphere, Frederick II entered the world. Born to Emperor Henry VI and Empress Constance, the infant Frederick seemed destined for greatness. His Hohenstaufen father ruled the Holy Roman Empire that dominated northern Europe. His Norman mother was Queen of Sicily, the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. This baby boy stood to inherit a domain that would stretch from the North Sea to North Africa if he lived long enough to claim it. Fate had other plans. Before Frederick's 4th birthday, both his parents were dead. His father collapsed with sudden fever during a hunt. His mother followed barely a year later. Imagine this. A 4-year-old child, technically king of Sicily and heir to an empire, suddenly alone in a world of predatory nobles, ambitious popes and rival claimants to his thrones. Pope Innocent III became Frederick's guardian, but the boy was largely abandoned. Contemporary chroniclers describe a heartbreaking scene, the young king in name only, wandering the streets of Palermo, begging for food and attention from the citizens of his own capital. His health was poor, his future bleak. No one expected this fragile orphan to survive to adulthood, much less rule. One observer wrote, "The child king walks alone through his palace, forgotten by those who should serve him, remembered only by those who wish him harm." While Frederick struggled merely to survive in Sicily, his German inheritance slipped away entirely. His uncle Philip claimed the imperial crown, battling the papal candidate Otto. The orphaned boy was barely an afterthought in this power struggle. Even in Sicily, various factions controlled the government, while the child king remained a powerless figurehead. His treasury plundered, his authority ignored. Yet within this apparent tragedy lay a hidden blessing. Palermo in the late 12th century was unlike any other European capital, dazzling mosaic of cultures where Norman, Greek, Arab and Latin influences mingled freely. As the neglected boy king wandered his capital, he absorbed this rich environment like a sponge. From the city's diverse population, he learned languages, customs and ideas that no traditional royal education could have provided. By age 7, Frederick could reportedly converse in Arabic and Greek alongside Latin and his native Italian, an extraordinary achievement that would shape his worldview forever. In the markets of Palermo, he heard Arab merchants discuss mathematics and astronomy far more advanced than anything taught in European schools. In the harbour, he listened to sailors' tales of distant lands. In the city's mosques and synagogues, he encountered religious traditions different from his own. This unlikely education continued through his teenage years. At 14, he was married to Constance of Aragon, a political alliance arranged by the Pope to strengthen Frederick's tenuous position in Sicily. The teenage king seemed destined to remain a minor figure, his grand birthright lost forever. His guardian had abandoned him, his German inheritance was controlled by others, and even in Sicily he was king in name alone. Yet those who dismissed the young king failed to recognize what was forming beneath the surface. An intellect of extraordinary power, a political cunning born from years of observing betrayal, and an unquenchable ambition to reclaim everything that had been taken from him. None could have imagined that this neglected orphan, this child of Apulia, as chroniclers called him, would not only survive, but would rise to become the most formidable ruler in Europe, outmaneuvering everyone who had once underestimated him. The stage was set for one of history's most remarkable comebacks. The year 1208 brought a dramatic shift in the young king's fortunes. Frederick, now 14, received shocking news. His uncle Philip had been assassinated, leaving the imperial title solely in the hands of Otto IV. But Otto soon made a fatal error. He invaded territories in Italy that the Pope considered under papal protection. With this reckless move, Otto transformed from papal ally to enemy overnight. Pope Innocent III, searching for a challenger to Otto, turned to the teenage Frederick in Sicily. The same guardian who had neglected him for years now proposed an audacious gamble. Frederick should leave Sicily and venture north to claim the imperial crown that had been his father's. The journey would take him through hostile territories controlled by his enemies, with capture or assassination a constant threat. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Frederick succeeded, he would reclaim his birthright and become the most powerful ruler in Europe. If he failed, he would likely lose not just his bid for empire, but his life. Most 16-year-olds would have shrunk from such a perilous challenge. Frederick embraced it. In the spring of 1212, the teenage king slipped out of Palermo harbour with a handful of loyal followers and virtually empty coffers. Chroniclers called it his adventura, his adventure, though suicide mission might have seemed more accurate. Otto's forces controlled much of northern Italy, and the young challenger had few troops and little money to support his cause. What followed became the stuff of legend. Frederick navigated the dangerous Italian peninsula like a seasoned chess master, evading Otto's forces through cunning and luck. Several times he narrowly escaped capture. One chronicler recounts how Frederick disguised himself as a pilgrim to slip past enemy patrols. Another tells how he crossed an alpine pass with just 3 companions when the main roads were blocked by his enemies. Then, against all odds, Frederick reached the German principalities where his father and grandfather had ruled. There his natural charisma and political genius came to the fore. In one principality after another, he won supporters through persuasion, promises, and his striking personal presence. The young man who had grown up in multicultural Sicily charmed the German princes with his quick wit and bold vision. He spoke like one twice his age, wrote one contemporary observer, and moved like one born to command. Another noted, his words seemed touched with magic, for those who came to judge him remained to serve him. By December 1212, enough German princes supported Frederick to elect him king of the Romans, the title for the emperor-elect at Frankfurt. He was crowned at Mainz days later, an extraordinary achievement for a youth who just months before had been a powerless figurehead in distant Sicily. Yet Frederick's position remained precarious. Otto still controlled significant territories and commanded a larger army. The next several years saw Frederick engaged in a high-stakes civil war, where every alliance, every battle, and every diplomatic maneuver could determine not just the imperial succession, but his very survival. The tide turned decisively at the Battle of Bouvines in 1214. There Otto and his ally King John of England suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the French King Philip Augustus, who supported Frederick. Though Frederick himself wasn't present at this pivotal battle, its outcome destroyed Otto's credibility and power base. By 1215, most of Germany acknowledged Frederick as king, with Otto retaining support only in his native Saxon land. Frederick's diplomatic manoeuvring during this period revealed his extraordinary political instinct. He secured crucial French support, won over the German princes with unprecedented concessions of rights and privileges, and maintained papal backing by making sweeping promises to Pope Innocent, including pledges to lead a crusade and to keep the kingdoms of Sicily and Germany separate. These were promises he had no intention of keeping in full, but they served his immediate purpose. In November 1220, Frederick returned to Rome for his imperial coronation. In a ceremony of breathtaking splendour at St. Peter's Basilica, the 25-year-old orphan who had once begged for food in the streets of Palermo was crowned Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. Simultaneously, he remained King of Sicily, creating a power bloc that effectively surrounded the Papal States, a strategic position that would lead to future conflicts with Rome. The neglected child had reclaimed his birthright against impossible odds. But Frederick didn't see this achievement as the culmination of his ambitions, merely their beginning. Rather than remaining in Germany, as previous emperors had done, he soon returned to his beloved Sicily, establishing his court at Palermo. From this Mediterranean base, he he would launch a cultural and intellectual revolution that would earn him his most famous title, Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. Dawn breaks over Palermo and the imperial palace buzzes with an energy unlike any other court in Europe. In one chamber, Jewish translators pore over Arabic mathematical texts. In another, Muslim astronomers demonstrate celestial movements to Christian scholars. In the gardens, the emperor himself examines exotic birds brought from distant lands, dictating observations to scribes. This isn't a scene from some imagined utopia. This was Frederick's actual court, a place where the boundaries between faiths and cultures dissolved in the pursuit of knowledge. While other medieval rulers obsessed over warfare and land acquisition, Frederick created the most sophisticated intellectual centre Europe had seen since the fall of Rome. His court wasn't just a place of power, but a crucible of ideas, where the future was being forged through scholarship, science, and art. Frederick's own intellectual achievements defied belief, fluent in 6 languages: Latin, Sicilian, German, French, Greek, and Arabic. He could directly access knowledge from across the known world without intermediaries. This linguistic mastery gave him tremendous advantages in diplomacy and scholarship. One contemporary marvelled, "He speaks with Greeks in their language, with Arabs in theirs, and each believes the emperor must be of their own nation." The emperor's love of poetry transformed European literature. At his Sicilian court he established the first literary movement to abandon Latin in favour of a vernacular language. Frederick himself composed verses in this early Italian dialect, helping establish the foundations for what would later blossom into the Italian literary tradition. Under his patronage, court poets developed new forms, including the sonnet, which would later be perfected by Dante and Petrarch. One of these court poems captures the revolutionary spirit of Frederick's reign. "New songs I bring from the south wind's homeland. Words never heard before on mortal lips, a language born not of dust, but of passion, that future ages will claim as their own." Frederick's scientific endeavours were even more groundbreaking. His masterpiece, The Art of Hunting with Birds, revolutionized natural science. Unlike medieval authors who merely copied ancient authorities, Frederick conducted systematic observations and experiments. He maintained extensive aviaries where he could study birds year-round, documented migration patterns, and performed dissections to understand avian anatomy. His approach was revolutionary. In the preface to his treatise, Frederick explicitly rejected blind adherence to ancient writers. "We have not relied on the findings in the writings of the ancients, for their words are either doubtful or fallacious. We have followed experience alone as our teacher in all things." This declaration, astonishing for a time when questioning Aristotle was near heresy, reveals how far ahead of his time Frederick truly was. The emperor's experimental method extended to other realms of knowledge. He tested how vultures located food by placing carcasses in covered containers, allowing scent to escape while eliminating visual cues. He studied the digestive process by having volunteers consume different foods, then examining what happened at various intervals. When questions arose about the original language of humanity, he devised an experiment rather than consulting theological authorities, though his method of raising children in isolation from speech would horrify modern ethicists. In 1224, Frederick established the University of Naples, the first state-founded university in Europe and a revolutionary institution in several ways. Unlike other medieval universities that operated under church control, Naples was explicitly secular and state-directed. Its primary purpose was training administrators for Frederick's government, but its curriculum encompassed medicine, philosophy, mathematics, and natural science, drawing on both Western and Arabic scholarly traditions. The emperor transformed southern Italy into Europe's most advanced centre of medical knowledge. He legalized human dissection for anatomical studies, a practice forbidden elsewhere on religious grounds. He standardized medical education through laws requiring physicians to study anatomy and complete supervised clinical training before practicing independently. These regulations established precedents that medical schools would follow for centuries. Frederick's legal masterpiece, the Constitutions of Melfi, created in 1231, was centuries ahead of its time. This comprehensive legal code established a professional judiciary, regularized taxation, and guaranteed certain protections to all subjects regardless of religion. While Northern Europe remained mired in arbitrary feudal justice, Frederick was building a centralized state with professional administrators chosen for merit rather than birth. Even his architecture reflected his revolutionary vision. His most famous creation, Castel del Monte, combines elements of classical, Gothic and Islamic design in an octagonal structure of perfect mathematical precision. The castle's mysterious purpose, was it a hunting lodge, an astronomical observatory, or a symbolic representation of imperial power, continues to fascinate historians. Whatever its intended function, it stands as a physical embodiment of Frederick's unique fusion of cultures and ideas. This breathtaking intellectual achievement, this fusion of European, Byzantine and Islamic knowledge, represented a brief flowering of multicultural learning that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance 2 centuries later. In many ways, Frederick was that movement's forerunner, a ruler who looked to classical learning, embraced empirical observation, and valued human achievement in this world, rather than focusing solely on the next. This revolutionary approach would soon be demonstrated in his most controversial achievement, reclaiming Jerusalem not through holy war, but through diplomacy and cultural understanding. For 18 years, Frederick had delayed fulfilling his Crusader vow. Now, in 1227, preparations were finally underway. Crusader ships crowded the harbour at Brindisi, and knights from across Europe gathered under the imperial banner. But Frederick's crusade would unfold unlike any before it, beginning with disaster and ending with a diplomatic triumph that would scandalize Christendom. As the expedition prepared to depart, catastrophe struck. An epidemic swept through the assembled troops. Frederick himself fell gravely ill with fever. Barely able to stand, he made the difficult decision to postpone the crusade and return to port. Messengers raced to inform Pope Gregory IX of the delay. The Pope's response shocked Europe. Refusing to accept Frederick's explanation, Gregory excommunicated the emperor, not for opposing the crusade, but for delaying it. Better a sick man should die on crusade, the Pope reportedly declared, than Christendom should wait another year for Jerusalem. Now Frederick faced an extraordinary situation. He remained committed to his crusading vow, but would be leading a holy war while formally expelled from the church. No medieval ruler had ever attempted something so paradoxical. Many advised him to abandon the enterprise until reconciled with Rome. Frederick's response was characteristic. If the Pope will not accept my illness as cause for delay, then I shall go to Jerusalem without his blessing. In 1228, the excommunicated emperor set sail for the Holy Land with a much reduced force. When he arrived in Acre, the situation was worse than expected. The papal representatives in the Levant, following their master's lead, refused to cooperate with the excommunicated emperor. The major military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, were reluctant to follow his command. Many Crusader nobles questioned whether they could serve under a leader the Pope had declared outside the church. A lesser man might have abandoned the enterprise in frustration. Frederick instead pursued a strategy no previous Crusader had considered: diplomacy rather than warfare. For years he had exchanged letters and gifts with Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt, who controlled Jerusalem. Unlike European rulers who viewed Muslims only as infidels to be conquered, Frederick respected Islamic culture and scholarship. He had studied Arabic, employed Muslim scholars at his court, and read the Quran to understand the faith of those he would negotiate with. Frederick's approach was pragmatic rather than ideological. He understood that Alchemil faced internal challenges from his brothers in Syria and Mesopotamia. The emperor positioned himself as a potential ally rather than merely an enemy. With his knowledge of Arabic culture and language, he could negotiate directly without translators or cultural misunderstandings. For months, messengers travelled between the emperor's camp and the sultan's court. While Frederick's Crusader army grew increasingly restless, the emperor engaged in patient diplomacy. He sent precious gifts to Alchemil, including a magnificent white bear that reportedly fished for salmon to entertain the sultan. He shared astronomical instruments and mathematical texts that interested the scientifically minded Muslim ruler. In February 1229, the unthinkable happened. Without a battle being fought, Frederick and Alchemil signed the Treaty of Jaffa and Tel Ajur. Through pure diplomacy, the emperor secured Christian control of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, and a corridor to the coast. The treaty allowed Muslims to retain their religious rights in Jerusalem, including control of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. It established a 10-year truce and free passage for pilgrims of both faiths. What Frederick accomplished with words, generations of Crusader kings had failed to achieve with swords. Jerusalem, lost to Christendom for decades, returned to Christian hands without a drop of blood being spilled. It should have been celebrated as a diplomatic. Instead, it provoked outrage. The treaty's religious tolerance was viewed as scandalous by Christian hardliners. The Patriarch of Jerusalem placed the holy city under interdict when Frederick entered, forbidding religious services during the emperor's presence. One contemporary chronicler wrote, "He gained the holy city, but lost his soul in the bargain." Undeterred by this hostility, Frederick entered Jerusalem on March 17, 1229. Finding no priest willing to crown him due to his excommunicated status, he placed the crown of Jerusalem on his own head in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. One witness described the scene. "Without blessing, without ceremony, he took the crown from the altar and placed it upon his own head. No Te Deum was sung, no prayers were offered, only silence, as the excommunicate crowned himself king in the holiest place in Christendom." Meanwhile, in Europe, Pope Gregory was so enraged by Frederick's independent success that he launched an invasion of the emperor's Italian territories while Frederick was in the Holy Land. "Better Jerusalem remain in infidel hands," one papal supporter reportedly said, "than be recovered by this enemy of the Church." Frederick quickly returned to Italy to repel the papal invasion, effectively ending his time in the Holy Land. Though the treaty he negotiated would last only until 1239, his achievement remained remarkable. He had demonstrated that negotiation could succeed where military force had repeatedly failed, establishing a precedent for intercultural diplomacy centuries ahead of its time. One Muslim chronicler captured the contradiction at the heart of Frederick's crusade. "This Sultan of the Franks," he wrote, "is unlike any who came before him. He speaks our language, respects our customs, and values knowledge above conquest. Had he been born among the followers of the Prophet rather than those of the Cross, Islam might have found in him its greatest champion." Picture a scene unimaginable elsewhere in 13th century Europe. An emperor, crown set aside, sleeves rolled up, personally dissecting a falcon to understand its digestive system. Nearby, scribes record every observation. Frederick isn't delegating this task to physicians or scholars. He insists on seeing with his own eyes, touching with his own hands. This hands-on approach to knowledge would revolutionize medieval science. While most rulers contented themselves with sponsoring scholarly works, Frederick actively conducted research. His approach emphasized direct observation over ancient authorities, a revolutionary concept in an age when scholars typically limited themselves to commenting on Aristotle and Galen rather than investigating nature firsthand. The emperor's masterpiece, The Art of Hunting with Birds, transcended its practical subject to become medieval Europe's most important zoological treatise. Written between 1230 and 1245, the lavishly illustrated manuscript revealed Frederick's meticulous methodology. He maintained extensive aviaries for controlled observation, documented bird migration patterns across seasons, and personally conducted dissections to understand avian anatomy. The opening declaration of this work still startles modern readers with its empirical approach. We have set down in this book what we ourselves have learnt through experience and what we have had confirmed by experts from different parts of the world who have hunted with us. For it is our intention to explain the true facts of nature, which can only be learnt through experience itself. This explicit rejection of reliance on ancient authorities was nothing short of revolutionary. When Frederick contradicted Aristotle based on his own observations, he was breaking with over 1,000 years of intellectual tradition. One historian notes, while medieval scholars asked, "What did Aristotle say?" Frederick asked, "What do I observe?" His experimental approach extended far beyond ornithology. Contemporary accounts describe numerous scientific investigations conducted under imperial direction. In one famous experiment, testing how vultures located food, Frederick placed decomposing carcasses in covered containers to eliminate visual cues while allowing scent to escape, then observed whether vultures were attracted. This controlled experiment methodology was centuries ahead of its time. Frederick assembled an extraordinary menagerie that became a living laboratory. His collection included elephants, giraffes, camels, big cats, and even a polar bear that reportedly fished in the Neapolitan harbour. These weren't merely exotic curiosities, but subjects for scientific study. Court records detail the emperor's systematic observations of animal behaviour, diet, and reproduction. One account describes Frederick's fascination with embryonic development. The emperor ordered eggs open each day of their incubation, examining how the chick formed from seemingly nothing. First the heart, visible as a pulsing point, then limbs appearing day by day. He had his findings recorded with precision, creating a document unlike any before it. His interest in human medicine proved equally innovative. Frederick legalized human dissection for anatomical studies at his University of Naples, a practice forbidden elsewhere in Europe on religious grounds. This decision advanced medical knowledge by allowing direct observation of human anatomy rather than reliance on animal dissections or ancient texts. Frederick standardized medical education through revolutionary regulations, requiring physicians to study anatomy and complete supervised clinical training before practicing independently. His legal code specified, "No one shall practice medicine unless he has been found competent by the masters of Salerno and presents letters testimonial from the masters who taught him." These regulations established precedents that medical schools would follow for centuries. The emperor's mathematical interests connected European scholars with advanced Arabic mathematics. He corresponded with Leonardo Fibonacci, the mathematician who introduced the Arabic numeral system to Europe. Fibonacci dedicated the revised version of his revolutionary Liber Bacci to Frederick, acknowledging the emperor's support for mathematical innovation. This work transformed European calculation methods, replacing cumbersome Roman numerals with a more flexible Arabic system we still use today. Frederick's scientific approach extended to agriculture as well. He established experimental farms where new crops and techniques were tested, including plants brought from the Islamic world. His manual on animal husbandry combined traditional knowledge with new observation, and section on horse breeding outlined systematic selection principles that anticipated modern genetic understanding. Always match the strongest dam with the strongest sire, for like produces like, and weakness will follow weakness through generations. Even Frederick's architectural projects revealed his scientific mindset. Castel del Monte's precise octagonal structure, with 8 octagonal towers, demonstrates his fascination with geometric perfection. The castle's orientation to celestial bodies, precise mathematical proportions, and innovative hydraulic systems suggest it may have served as an astronomical observatory and centre for scientific study, as much as a defensive structure. Frederick's scientific pursuits earned him both admiration and suspicion. To fellow seekers of knowledge, he was a remarkable patron and practitioner of natural philosophy. To his enemies, particularly in the Church, his empirical investigations seemed dangerous, even heretical. Rumours spread that he conducted bizarre experiments on prisoners, tested poisons on unwilling subjects, and studied forbidden knowledge. One chronicler, hostile to Frederick, wrote, "He seeks to know what ought not be known, to understand what God has hidden, to question what should be accepted on faith alone. In this, as in all things, he shows himself an enemy of God." Such accusations reveal how threatening Frederick's empirical approach appeared to traditional authorities. By prioritizing observation over received wisdom, establishing institutions for research, and personally conducting experimental work, he helped establish foundations for the scientific method. Centuries before the scientific revolution, his approach to knowledge, curious, empirical, and practical, would be one of his most enduring legacies, a beacon of rational inquiry in an age dominated by appeals to authority. On a winter day in 1250, in a castle in southern Italy, the wonder of the world breathed his last. Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, King of Sicily and Jerusalem, died at 55, reportedly wearing the simple robe of a Cistercian monk, rather than his imperial regalia. Even in death he defied convention. As news of his passing spread across Europe, reactions revealed his controversial impact. Pope Innocent IV, upon hearing the news, declared, "Let heaven rejoice, and let the earth be glad, for the tyrant who afflicted both with his lightning is cast down to hell." Meanwhile, in Sicily and southern Italy, public mourning was so intense that imperial officials had to issue proclamations urging restraint. Within decades of Frederick's death, the empire he had built began to crumble. His legitimate heir, Conrad IV, struggled against papal opposition in Germany, while Frederick's illegitimate son, Manfred, fought to hold Sicily. The papacy, seeing its opportunity, launched a crusade against Frederick's heirs. By 1268, with the execution of Frederick's teenage grandson Conradin, beheaded in the public square in Naples, the main Hohenstaufen line was extinguished. Yet physical empires always fall. Frederick's true legacy lay in the intellectual and cultural revolutions he had sparked, transformations that would outlive both his dynasty and his enemies. The University of Naples, though temporarily closed after his death, was revived and continues today as one of Europe's oldest academic institutions. His legal masterpiece, the Constitutions of Melfi, influenced legal development throughout Europe, with concepts centuries ahead of their time: standardized written law, procedural regularity, and state authority independent of ecclesiastical control. Frederick's scientific contributions remained relevant long after his passing. His treatise on falconry continued to be copied, studied, and expanded upon for centuries. The Arabic numeral system and mathematical techniques he had promoted through his support of Fibonacci transformed European commerce, science, and administration. His medical regulations became models for later standards of medical education and practice throughout Europe. In culture and literature, the Sicilian school of poetry he established laid groundwork for the Italian literary Renaissance. The sonnet form developed at his court would become a foundation of European poetry, later perfected by Petrarch, Shakespeare, and countless others. Dante Alighieri, writing 2 generations after Frederick's death, placed the emperor in hell in his Divine Comedy, but nevertheless acknowledged his greatness, calling him the last emperor of the Romans, a backhanded tribute from a Guelph people supporter to his Ghibelline imperial adversary. Perhaps most significantly, Frederick provided a model of a ruler who transcended the limitations of medieval thought. In an age of religious warfare and rigid orthodoxy, he demonstrated the possibility of multicultural cooperation and religious tolerance. In an intellectual environment dominated by appeals to authority, he championed empirical observation and practical knowledge. In governance, he showed how a centralized state with professional administrators could function more effectively than traditional feudalism. Frederick's vision was so far ahead of his time that Europe would need to wait for the Renaissance and Enlightenment to fully embrace many of his ideas, yet he planted seeds that would eventually bear fruit. The scholars who had worked at his court scattered throughout Europe after his death, carrying his ideas to new centers of learning. The manuscripts produced under his patronage preserved and transmitted knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. His memory lived on most vividly in southern Italy and Sicily, where legends persisted long after his death. Stories circulated that Frederick wasn't truly dead but sleeping inside Mount Etna, waiting to return when needed, a messianic myth reminiscent of the King Arthur legends. In these lands he had ruled most directly. Common people remembered not the Pope's Antichrist but a just king who had kept taxes reasonable, justice accessible, and respected local customs and religion. One Sicilian folk tale captures this enduring affection. A traveller came upon an old shepherd in the shadow of Mount Etna. Was Frederick a good king? The traveller asked. The shepherd pointed to the mountain and replied, "He sleeps within, and on the day he wakes, Sicily will know greatness again." Even the Church, his great adversary, could not completely erase Frederick's legacy. Though papal propaganda portrayed him as heretic and enemy of Christendom, his achievements were too substantial to deny. Later scholars, particularly during the Renaissance, would rediscover Frederick as a predecessor to their own efforts to revive classical learning and promote rational inquiry. 8 centuries after his death, Frederick II remains one of history's most fascinating rulers, the orphaned boy who became Stupor Mundi, the wonder of the world. His life reminds us that occasionally history produces individuals who see beyond the limitations of their own time, whose vision and abilities are so extraordinary that they change the course of civilization. Frederick was such a figure, a medieval emperor, whose outlook was, in many ways, startlingly modern, and whose achievements continue to inspire wonder to this day. Frederick's remarkable journey from abandoned orphan to Europe's most powerful and innovative ruler contains lessons that resonate far beyond the 13th century. His life reminds us that extraordinary achievement can emerge from difficult beginnings, that cultural understanding often proves more effective than conflict, and that questioning established authorities can lead to revolutionary discoveries. What makes Frederick's story particularly relevant today is his ability to bridge cultural divides at a time when most Europeans viewed the Islamic world with fear and hostility. His multilingual court, where scholars of different faiths worked side by side, demonstrated the potential for intercultural cooperation centuries before such ideas became widely accepted. Frederick's scientific approach, privileging observation over authority, anticipated the scientific revolution by hundreds of years. His legal innovations, separating civil from religious law and establishing professional courts, laid foundations for modern governance. Even his diplomatic crusade, achieving through negotiation what military campaigns had failed to accomplish, offers a powerful example of effective statecraft. The wonder of the world remains a wonder precisely because he transcended the limitations of his era, showing us possibilities that many of his contemporaries could scarcely imagine. In exploring Frederick's extraordinary life, we glimpse a different vision of the medieval world, one where empirical knowledge, cultural exchange, and pragmatic governance briefly flourished under the guidance of a ruler whose vision extended far beyond the horizons of his time.
And thus concludes another chapter in our ongoing exploration of medieval history.
Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to delve deeper into the fascinating world of the Middle Ages, I invite you to join our community on Patreon. Find the link in our description or search for the Saving History channel on Patreon. Our subscribers get access to exclusive bonus episodes, early releases, and a wealth of additional medieval content. Don't forget to subscribe to Saving History on your favorite podcast platform to ensure you never miss an episode. Remember, in understanding our past, we gain insight into our present. Until our next historical adventure, this is your host, Hunter, encouraging you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep saving history.